So why did these books end up buried here? Well, scholars believe they came from a nearby monastery from the 4th century, now in ruins. The texts may well have belonged to the monks who lived here, and when Bishop Athanasius issued his stern edict, they should have got rid of those books, deemed heretical.
But they couldn't bring themselves to destroy them, perhaps because they found wisdom and consolation in their words. So they simply buried them, in order that they might be uncovered again some other day.
There's even a rumor that the skeleton found with the scrolls belonged to a slave ordered by the monks to carry the 13 books to their burial place, and then murdered to prevent him from revealing their secret. Despite the monks' best efforts to protect their texts, ironically it was after their discovery by the Bedouin farmers in 1945 that they nearly didn't survive.
Having found the papyri, the ringleader Ali ripped them up to divide them between his companions. When they showed no interest, he wrapped them in his turban and took them home. When he got there, he threw them into a courtyard which was reserved for animals. To make matters worse, his mother used some of the brittle leaves that evening to start a fire for the family meal. It's a miracle they survived at all.
But survive they did, and one way or another the texts found their way north to the safety of one of Egypt's most respected museums. This is the Coptic Museum, and it's here that the Nag Hammadi scrolls are now housed.
This is fantastic.
Yeah, it really is.
I want to find out just what it was about them that made the leaders of the early church feel it was necessary to condemn them as heresy.
Coptic stonework.
My companion is the distinguished Coptologist Stephen Emmel, who's spent over 30 years conserving and studying the texts. Amongst the manuscripts found were many fragments of Gospels not included in the New Testament. One such text is the Gospel of Thomas, unusual because it was discovered in its entirety. It's attributed to, although not proven to be, the work of one of Jesus' disciples, famous in the New Testament as Doubting Thomas. He's the apostle who refused to believe in Jesus' resurrection until he saw it for himself. The Gospel penned in his name is a collection of 114 sayings ascribed to Jesus, written in Coptic, the Egyptian language from the beginning of the Christian period. Its style and central message is very different from that found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
It begins here. This is the subtitle to the previous work. Then a new work begins. These are the secret words that the living Jesus spoke, and Didymus Judas Thomas wrote them down. And then what follows in the Gospel is simply a series of sayings of Jesus. Most of them are introduced with the simple phrase, Jesus said. But there is no narrative framework. There's no mention of his death, no mention of his resurrection. Rather, it's things that Jesus said, puzzling things, and the point is for the reader to understand them, to think, not simply to believe.
So are the sayings from Thomas similar to the ones that we find in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John?
Many of the sayings in the Gospel of Thomas are identical with sayings that we find in the New Testament Gospels. Some of them are completely new. Perhaps the most famous is at the very end of the Gospel of Thomas, which we have here. Simon Peter said to them, "Let Mary go away from us, because women are not worthy of life." Jesus said, "Behold, I will lead her so that she might become male, so that she might become also a living spirit, like you males." because any woman who makes herself male will go into the kingdom of the heavens. Now that's a saying we don't find anywhere in the New Testament.
I'm not sure I see that going down particularly well in the Western world right now.
It's been a very controversial subject of discussion, what exactly is meant there. I'm inclined to agree with those people who argue that it's not literally meant a kind of biological transformation from a woman into a man, but rather in general in the ancient world, maleness, and not just human maleness, but male as a concept was understood as being more complete, more perfect than femaleness. Partly it was a male chauvinistic society. And so that what's being said here is that any person, and especially any woman, who becomes a more complete or a perfect human being will enter into the kingdom of heaven.
Scholarly debate has raged over the historical accuracy of Thomas's Gospel, and much of the argument has concentrated on its date. Although the physical manuscript of Thomas can be dated to the early 4th century, there's speculation that the content of the Gospel is far older. The logic goes that if it was written in the 1st century, it could well be earlier than the canonical Gospels. And if that's the case, it's the nearest we'll ever get to the historical Jesus.
So is this the earliest information about Jesus that we have?
It could be, because this form, nothing but a series of teachings of Jesus, a few very simple narrative frameworks, but no biographical information whatsoever, whereas the canonical Gospels, especially Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are cast as a kind of biography of Jesus. This form, transmitting simply what Jesus said, what he taught, is what scholars have for hundreds of years assumed was the more original form of the Gospel as the message of Jesus. So the Gospel of Thomas, certainly according to its form, could well be historically older, earlier than any of the Gospels in the Bible.
The fact that so many fragments of the Gospel of Thomas have been found also suggests that, as well as being early, it was widely read. And the good condition of the Nag Hammadi text in particular was because it was written on the best quality papyri, save for the books that were highly valued. So what exactly was it about the Gospel of Thomas that led to its exclusion from the New Testament? On the surface, a text that contains the sayings of Jesus hardly seems controversial, and yet even though I studied at theological college, I wasn't taught about it. Well, there's a hint in that very first saying in the book. The Gospel starts, "These are the hidden sayings that the living Jesus spoke and that Didymus Judas Thomas wrote down. And he said, whoever finds the correct interpretation of these sayings will never die." And when you read Thomas, this hiddenness is immediately apparent. The Gospel is straightforward. It's though it's been written to be deliberately obscure, sayings such as, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Their meaning is cryptic. It's also compelling. In fact, these pithy aphorisms were riddles, waiting to be decoded. But this wasn't just a word game. Those who successfully deciphered the code would be rewarded with immortality.
And it was exactly the secrecy of the sayings and what they promised that the Orthodox leaders of the Church found so disquieting.
I wanted to know about the promise of eternal life held in these enigmatic teachings, and about the people who believed in them. So I joined Bart Ehrman for a glimpse of the forgotten world in which Thomas once flourished.
This gospel emphasizes the importance of secret knowledge for salvation. The key to salvation, according to the Gospel of Thomas, is by learning the secret teachings of Jesus and knowing what they meant. There were groups of Christians in the early church known as Gnostic Christians. They were called Gnostics because the Greek word for knowledge is gnosis. They were the Christians who knew, who had the secret knowledge that brings about salvation. In my opinion, the Gospel of Thomas is a Gnostic gospel propounding a set of beliefs that if people can understand, they'll have eternal life.